that's really a question for today's session. We'll have that up on the board in just a second.
Hi, I'm Josh from Mac. I don't really get to ask many interesting questions. It's mostly what do we think this is going to be, how they think about problems, or something like that. So that's really most of what I got.
So you're more helping students get through their questions? Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Josh.
I just spoke with Chips. I'm from the Communication Rhetorical Studies department. I actually didn't ask a lot of questions this week. My class, this was a workshop week. But before we got started working on their projects, I asked them, all right, so why are we doing this?
That's a great question to get to rationale and have students think more deeply. Did you tell us your name? Courtney. Thank you, Courtney.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa from Instructional Design Development and Evaluation. So this week we have a workshop with Amber. So one question I asked is, will students play with different kinds of technologies? And that time I asked them what are the advantages or disadvantages about those two sides.
That's nice to get both sides of any issue or advantages and disadvantages. Lots of opportunities for students to talk.
I'm Amber Walton, and I'm also from Instructional Design Development and Evaluation. The question that I asked this morning in class was, what was surprising to you about this technology? And then also, what discoveries did you make while interacting with this technology?
Strong questions.
My name is Natasha, and I'm in the Art and Music History department. And this week in lecture, we started talking about a new historical and stylistic period. So I began my lecture asking the students, how would you describe the Baroque to somebody who's never heard of that before? Like, how would you describe it in order to engage them?
That's a great way to get them to show what they're thinking, is to explain to others.
Hi, my name is Sylv. I'm from the Transmedia department in BPA, and I'm a TA. I teach FIL 122 is an introductory class to the film major for film production. So one question I asked this week was because they did their assignment on shooting an exercise, so I check in on them and I see how that went and some of the, what were the challenges they faced. And they shared some stuff, like some actors didn't show up and some technical issues and stuff like that. Yeah.
So process-based questions. We've had some content questions, now some process-based questions.
Yeah, my name is Qasim. I'm a final year PhD student of political science. I've been running discussion section for most of my TA in the past, but this semester I'm not running discussion section. I'm helping a history professor in the history department, which doesn't have discussion section. My job is mainly grading papers and stuff like that. So I'm not running any discussions, so no questions.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's all right. So, when we're having a session about questions, we should probably get all of our own questions about questions out in the open so that we can discuss them. So think for a second, what are your questions to which you're seeking answers today? I'm going to turn this off so that we can hopefully write them on the screen. How do I make the screen? All right, so we don't have to raise hands, we don't have to go in an order. I'm looking to capture as many of your questions as possible. So anybody who wants to share a question that they have about questioning, something that they'd like an answer to today, or a question that might not have an easy answer, let us know so that we can capture them all on the board. Amber.
My question is, how can you encourage response? Especially when the question is asked, the first thing they do is look down at their laps or look down at their phones or look at their computers.
Good question.
I'm wondering how to make students feel comfortable sharing the information that they don't understand.
go for it, Josh.
I want to learn how to ask questions that lead students to an answer. Try to get them to come up with concepts on their own by asking them questions about what's going to happen, how does this work, that kind of thing.
So you're kind of saying that lead to but don't give an answer?
Yeah, I don't know. Tell it to them, or else I just tell them.
Okay.
You had one more question?
Yeah.
One of the challenges of running discussion sections when students are not prepared, they have not done, their jobs, they have not done the readings. How can you engage them in discussions when they haven't done the readings?
Maybe that's linked with the looking down as soon as a question is asked of them. Ah, like, I'm invisible. Don't.
So we're saying that these two have a link,
Maybe, yeah.
so we can link them together in what we're doing. Awesome, more questions.
I'm wondering, if you do get an answer and it's not correct, how can you best reply such that you're not discouraging future responses, but also not giving them misinformation by, like, agreeing to an answer that's not correct?
Okay.
More. I'm sure there's more questions that we all have.
Similar to how can you encourage response is how to encourage discussion specifically.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
Sometimes I ask questions and I ask them to talk about it with their groups, not to just give me an answer, to have a discussion. And often it doesn't. Either they just stare at each other, or they give like a one-word answer, one-sentence answer to each other, and then start talking about something else.
So it's really that discussion among peers without you having to lead every single response that you're asking.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
One of the other questions is, my first question was, typical about, the general students, but specifically some students who are typically silent, they don't engage in discussions. How can you engage silent students who are shy, they're not willing to really engage in open discussion?
Okay. To build on that, how do you encourage active listening as participation without the risk of encouraging silence?
Okay. So if you don't have any other questions about questioning at this point, what questions can you predict or consider that other people might have who aren't necessarily in the room? What are some of the big ideas within questioning?
How to improve or increase curiosity or interest in learning?
How to ask open-ended questions.
That's an open discussion.
I'm sure we can finish filling out the board. What are some other questions that would be useful to explore when discussing questioning?
How to keep it personal in a large class?
classes and different previous levels of knowledge. How do you really can engage such a diversity, a variety of students from different backgrounds? Some of them who are more knowledgeable, they want to monopolize discussions and dominate discussions, and others which are more reticent, silent. Yeah, how do you really approach the diversity of students?
So just to kind of summarize and rephrase, what are you asking? How to invite that diversity of responses? Or like, is it that we, or how to invite all voices to answer?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Make sure that they are all fairly represented in a way.
I have one that I'm going to add up here, is how to evaluate my questioning. Because I know a lot of times there's things that I know about teaching, but whether I am actually engaging in them and enacting that in my classroom, sometimes I'm not as sure. So that's a question that I would add. Yeah, really.
How to identify whether the silence is because of lack of knowledge or just because they are shy or just reluctant to answer?
There's space for one more. What's one more question that we can add up here?
So how to avoid just keep one or several students answering all of the questions all the time? They're very active.
We'll call them the dominant answerer.
Dominant answers.
All right, so this is a lot of good questions. And we started grouping a couple of them together when we said, oh, these two are pretty similar. What I want you to do is I want you to get in groups of 3, and we'll have, we should have 3 groups of 3, that's perfect. So get into groups of 3, and I want you to consider this group of questions and come up with maybe 3 to 4 overarching categories. How do you fit these questions into 3 to 4 overarching categories? All right, ready, set, go.
Should I pause it?
Different themes, and some of them are similar across, but some of you are thinking about categories in a slightly different way. So I'm going to have one group start by giving us one of their themes and a small explanation of it. And then if your group has something to add on to that theme, if you looked at something through a similar lens, you're welcome to voice that and add that to this discussion before we start adding on additional themes. Would the group in the back like to give us one first?
First, we identified 2 major themes. So one of the major themes is really how you manage the classroom. For example, how you would engage shy students, how you would prevent dominance of certain students in the discussions. So these have to do with the way you manage the classroom. Make sure that everyone is fairly represented in the discussion. So that's one category.
Great. Does the group have anything to add on to that category?
We had essentially the same category, but we named it differently. We did a timeline structure.
Okay.
This kind of little bit makes the other one make sense. Before you ask the question, actually asking the question, and after you ask the question. And environment, the classroom is kind of where we look up before you ask the question in a way.
So what we have so far is what we're calling classroom management. Right, and you're saying that within this classroom management, we kind of have 3 phases?
Oh no, that was our whole category idea, and so that one kind of fits into our whole board.
Okay. So really what I want then is to try to do these before, during, and after. Okay? And so you're saying that the classroom management piece fits here?
Mostly, yeah. I mean, there's overlap, definitely.
Okay. Is that, do you see that working within your ideas, group one?
Management, I think it falls under all categories, especially during discussions, how you manage discussions. It needs some preparation in advance, you need to think in advance how to engage everyone, but also during discussions, that's when it is more safe, the way you run, and manage the classroom. That's during, but that's a good way to look at it, to divide it time-wise, before, during, after.
Okay. Group two, can you help us figure out what we want to do with this classroom management piece here, where we see this fitting, or what we do with it?
So we were actually thinking the classroom management fell within a broader category, which was instructional strategies.
Okay. I'm just going to give us some running ideas as we go down. So keep talking.
Yeah, so instructional strategy, and that, classroom management falls under that category of instructional strategy, but also questioning would fall under instructional strategies. And as far as the timing of it, I kind of agree that these things, you can plan for them and you need to plan for them. And you have to be able to think on the fly, and you have to be able to reflect after the fact. So I think there is kind of a through line, different tasks, but throughout the 3 different phases that this group identified.
Go for it.
Sorry. Is there any way you can use the bookmark?
Yes, I can. Just trying to just pick a different color, but if you can't see it, I will definitely change it. So, what other categories have we come up with that we might be able to talk about within the before, during, and after structure?
We were talking about kind of the social effects.
Okay.
And that may be, setting the stage for the social environment of the class to be one that's supportive and open to the diversity of learners. That's something to kind of establish before and during. But then also to, I guess, be cognizant of the fact that there are social interactions and, students' own personal, not learning styles, but their own social interactivity that needs to be taken into consideration.
Great.
Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Other factors that we might want to explore? Or
We
other.
also have another category called individual learning preferences, which is pretty much about the individual differences among learners. It's different from the social effect. Some students just prefer to be, silent in class, not because of pressure of peers, pressure of being around, being embarrassed. They just choose to be silent in class. So those one are the most difficult for us to encourage because they didn't see the importance of interactions in class.
It's kind of jargon, but the concept of intrinsic motivation, or that some students just are naturally really interested in your class, and some are only showing up because they know they're going to get a grade.
Yeah. How many of you work with courses that have students coming from a variety of disciplines, where it may be a required course or an intro-level course? Yeah, and that becomes a really big thing of some students being like, this is going to be my major, I love it, I love everything you're saying, I'm right there. And then you have the students who are going, I don't even see what this has to do with me. Yeah, I think we can wrap that up in individuality. All right? These are 4 great categories. And honestly, I'm really excited about the before, during, and after structure. That is not something that has come out in this workshop before, and I think that's a really awesome way to start considering these. And I really like that we have the fortuitous occurrence that we have 3 groups here. So what we're going to do is you're going to go back into your 3 groups. We're going to have one group focus on before, one group focus on during, and one group focus on after. And I want you to share what you do in your classroom, what you've seen in other classrooms, and what you might be able to consider for the future across these different types of categories within that phase of teaching and learning. All right? Is there a group that has a really strong preference as to which one they would like to consider? Before? All right, you get to claim before. I hear rumbling. During? All right. You guys will take after for us. And you can consider that after the question has been asked within the response, but you can also include those reflective pieces too. Okay? Go back to it. The opposite. And start with reflection and move back to planning. Because a lot of times, at least what I have experienced in my own classroom, is that something happens and I have to figure out what to do with it now, or there's things that I see after I've taught a class that end up having implications for how I plan and how I conduct my previous class, that for me, a lot of my own teaching always starts and stops with that reflective piece and with that after piece. So we'll start that way with our discussion here.
So that was kind of actually the main part of after that kind of works for all 4 of the categories is an evaluation, taking the time after class to evaluate how you've done, both from yourself as well as this is kind of more social and individual, is to have student evaluations for them to evaluate you and what you've done. There's many ways to do that. And then when it came to also class strategies and classroom management, we also we did after as in evaluating, but we also thought of after as in like responses. Like you've asked the question, now what? So we talked about other ways that you could ask for responses. You could ask them digitally through answering services like Kahoot and what was it, Poll Everywhere. Using Post-it notes where people write down their answer, writing down their answers on the board, maybe doing kind of a think, pair, share type of thing where they are encouraged to answer your question as a group or with another person before they share to everyone else. And then kind of a classroom management, if you mess up, to apologize. If you know that if you mess up and you know you've messed up, sometimes you don't know until afterwards that you just take the chance and apologize. Because that does good for the classroom management. They see that you can fail and you can make mistakes, and also that they care and they're thinking about those. And then did you want our last question now?
No, you can save that for a second. So talking about Poll Everywhere and these electronic response management systems, how many people have seen Poll Everywhere before? Okay, how many people have seen Kahoot before? Okay, so Kahoot is a website that you can set up multiple choice quizzes and students can race each other to get to the correct answer. So it can kind of gamify things that are going on in your lesson. There are some drawbacks to using Kahoot in that it is speed-based, and sometimes what you're looking for is you want people to really think, or you at least want to give time that all students have an opportunity to think, because we all kind of process information at different rates. So go for it, try out Kahoot, see how it works in your classroom, but do be aware that there are some other considerations there. The one that I prefer is Poll Everywhere, and I have pulled it up for you so you can see what it looks like, maybe.
Can I say one other thing about Kahoot is
Yeah.
that there's a kind of inherent competition that's involved too, which makes some people uncomfortable.
So, is it coming up on the screen? Hopefully. Maybe not. Come on.
It's actually why I don't use Kahoot. I hate competition.
I know it bothers me, but you can make it worth 0 points, and you can set the time for like 2 minutes or something really long.
Okay, I can see it finally starting to turn turn itself back on there. When I put questions into Poll Everywhere, I can do it in such a way that it allows students to answer both on their cell phones and on laptops. So if one of the things that you find distracts from your class is that people are on their computers doing other things. I was hearing from a professor yesterday that she has students watching basketball while she's trying to teach.
Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah. But there's lots of different things that go on. One thing that you can do is use the devices that kids have in front of them, or I shouldn't say kids, that students have in front of them, so that you know that they're interacting with you on that device rather than some of the other ways that they might be interacting. So this is an introduction that I run within my class, that if you go through the survey, you can describe yourself as a reader and pick multiple choice responses, but then there's open-ended responses that can also be incorporated. You can build responses. Thank you. You can build responses that then appear as word clouds. So the more times people enter a word, the bigger it shows up on the screen. You can let these results be shown in real time to your students, so things are developing over the course of the class. So if you're asking questions in small groups, you can have small groups entering their responses so that then they become available to the entire group as well. But when we're talking about reflection and what comes after, one of the things that I can do is that I can look at a group's responses afterwards. This program saves all of those responses. So if you have people put in their name or a code name for each individual student, anything that you want to work out within your classroom, then you can always see what's going on with each of those individual students, plan out how you might want to incorporate them differently in future classes, or how to invite more of those voices into what you actually hear within your classroom. So that was a really cool thing to come out of that discussion. And what is our one big takeaway question to continue considering about reflection in the after phase?
So how could you assess or how would you evaluate if your question is a successful question?
Okay, and that's not a question any of us need to answer right now, but it's a good question for us to take away and continue thinking after today. How do you evaluate whether a question that you asked was successful or unsuccessful? One other thing about evaluating questions, I'll show you something that I tried in my classroom. You all have that lesson plan. And so on that lesson plan, there's 3 different types of questions written in 3 different types of font. There's questions that I was like, I absolutely must ask this in order for class to move forward. There's questions to take a step back and help students if they're not getting where I want them to go. And there's questions of if the discussion is going beyond where I expect it to go, how do I foster that development because I want them to keep going further. I then had one of my students in that specific class period write out each of the questions that I asked, and I analyzed which are the ones that I planned, what were the questioning levels of them, which were the ones that I did not plan and just asked spontaneously, and what does that tell me about my own questioning. So I asked 56 questions to the whole group, right? I'm not giving you all 56 questions in this little list here, because the class is 3 hours long, and you can see exactly how that broke down into when I was focusing on classroom management, getting tasks taken care of, what was planned within my instruction, and what I was, you guys have seen this, what was I doing in the moment, okay? So just a little chart like that is something really easy. If you record yourself or you have somebody observe you and take down some notes about that questioning, you can go back and analyze and evaluate those responses in a lot of different ways. Awesome, the during phase.
We had a bunch of different ideas about ways you can get people when they ask questions and that type of thing. I can't read this.
No,
Let her do it.
Thanks for introduction. So actually, this group covers some of our ideas as well, such as the think, clear, share strategy. We think it's a very good idea, and also it can deal with the social pressure of students if they want to be individually answer a question. They can talk to their friends and their peers before they speak in front of the whole class. And also we think about two strategy to scaffold the answering. One is to rephrase your question. If your question leads to the silence, maybe because it's too difficult or your wording is not very good, can rephrase it into more simple words or easy for the student to understand. Or you can provide multiple examples, 1 or 2 examples for them to answer, to give you more responses. And you can also call them by names, which is not ideal solution, but sometimes you need to call them if there is no response at all. And as Amber suggested, you can just say them who haven't spoken yet and ask them to give any opinion to questions.
I'd like to hear from someone who hasn't spoken yet.
And we also think about technology, like the Everywhere Kahoot. And for the post board, we can also use some kind of digital discussion board in class, like question board, discussion board. Normal does a lot of them. I think that's pretty much what we have discussed. How about the question to ask?
Final?
Go for it.
So we thought, we have all these strategies for different things you can do. When do you know which one should you use in what situation will each of these work? Because they all are going to be good in some ways, but have drawbacks in others. So
And that there's an inherent thinking on your feet, thinking on the fly. How do you kind of become adept at being flexible?
Awesome. Yeah, any of the strategies that we want to use, they all have what we call affordances and constraints, where they get us places, but anytime something's getting us somewhere, there's also some other impact, whether it's that it takes a lot of time or it takes a lot of planning on our part that we may or may not be able to do given other constraints. But there's, to always think about all of those different strategies, what's best for me in this specific setting, that's a great thing to continue thinking about. Other ways that I've seen people really foster discussion within the class, one is using Twitter, that you can put up a Twitter feed up on the board, and as discussion is happening, you can see other things that are going on. What have you said that's really stuck with students that they're willing to tweet back to the class?
So we talked about that too, and that there could be a danger of silly posts.
Oh, yeah.
Or inappropriate posts.
Yes, trust me, when I was running the TA orientation and we had 150 people in the room, we definitely had a couple of things come up on the big screen that it was like, I'm just going to pretend I don't see that, and we're going to keep going. You do have to think about what to do to manage some of those responses as well. Thank you. And also, in your handouts, you have a set that has a house on it.
This is so amazing.
So, on the set that has the house, this is what is called Costa's levels of questioning, where they say gathering information is the base level of questioning. Once you've gathered information and it's out there for your whole class to share the same information, then you can start processing that information as a group. And finally, you want to extend people's thinking into applying that information into novel settings or into practice in the field or anything like that. So the house helps us think about the fact that we need to lay the foundation before we're putting the roof on top or thinking about other types of possibilities. On the back side, you have Bloom's taxonomy of questioning, which says that there's different types of thinking that go on. Some of them are lower level thinking, some of them are higher level thinking, and that our questions, the way that we word our questions, direct students to a certain type of thinking. So this gives you those different types of thinking. It gives you actions and outcomes that you might be asking for in your classroom, and it also gives you a lot of question stems that can push your discussion forward as well. So this can help you think about what strategies really are appropriate and best for what I'm doing in the moment. And our planning people. What more do we have for planning?
Okay. Well, I mean, of course, you know, you have to have a game plan, right? And we spoke extensively about individuality and what individuality means for us, and how we can use that to have a more productive discussion, but also like a safer discussion. So by individuality, we identify class level, discipline background, which we can simply just check our rosters, right? And then also know any religious observances or ODS students, and then also make note of cultural backgrounds as well. And that's especially important, say, in the humanities, where you do come across a lot of problematic content, and have an idea of how you're going to present that content. You know, whether it be like a disclaimer beforehand, or just letting them know like what we're about to see, what we're about to talk about. You know, like if anybody, this is what we're going to be getting into. If anybody's uncomfortable with that, you know, please let us know. You're welcome to step out, or whatever it may be. So just being aware of the environment you're going to be walking into, and how you can present the material in that environment in the most positive, productive way. What else, you guys?
Well, we talked about checking the roster and getting the background of the students and a bit of their background, so that we can also sort of like put them into different groups that you can potentially do some matchmaking in assigning teams for projects or things like that, if it's like the team-based projects. And providing a space for people who might be introverts but want to participate, so having some sort of game plan on how to engage those students. And yeah, sending out the discussion beforehand, right? We mentioned that,
Yeah,
right?
that was one of the techniques, yeah, about instructional strategies, you know, so without you focus on it beforehand, you know, so the technique to use to encourage students' participation in discussions is really, and make sure that they come prepared, really to send out discussion question in advance, giving them time to reflect on the questions, and also sending out the lesson plans so they have a background and they have had the time to reflect on it. It makes sure that, you know, they can participate, you know, compared to when you give them out of the blue, you know, they haven't seen the questions, you know, beforehand, and they can't prepare. Some people need to really reflect a little bit on the questions. So,
And that's you brought up at the beginning about running discussions with students who haven't actually read the material.
yeah.
Setting a purpose for reading, since I'm in literacy instruction, that's my background. Giving people a purpose for reading, or something that they need to answer through that reading, is one of the best ways to actually engage people in their reading and to help them comprehend. So by giving them one or two of your large discussion questions, you're actually fostering getting them to read more, so that you don't have to worry about how do I run a discussion when people haven't read. It's kind of like a double-armed strategy. That's great. Okay. And what's your big takeaway question that we should continue considering as we go into our own spaces?
I think maybe just always, I don't know. We didn't really get to that.
Get to that.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
okay. Maybe I'll think on the spot right now. In that, if we plan for our questioning, how does that improve what we actually do when we're in the classroom? There's a lot of times that we don't actually plan for our questioning. We just know that we're going to ask questions when we get in the classroom. We know the topics, and we'll ask questions when we get there. So to consider, how can planning really improve what I do in the classroom? You have my version of a lesson plan that really focuses on that questioning. And I will be honest that I tried this out for the first time the week of this workshop last year as I should probably put something together. I have come to rely upon this so heavily. and that I always use it now with the categories that are listed here, where I really think about those levels of questioning, and I come up with a response plan. You'll notice some things within that response plan as to when am I going to call on people when their hands are raised? When am I going to cold call? I even have listed out in there who I'm specifically cold calling after they've been in small groups. These are students that were more reticent to participate. And so it was like, you know what? If they've had 15, 20 minutes to talk as a small group and they've been given the opportunity to have notes and feel confident in their responses, that's a great time to tell them, you can participate. You've got enough to do that with now. And that actually helps them to then answer more and get more involved throughout the class as well. So now I can say that I've actually done this a number of times and that I'm happy with that as a strategy. One other thing is that from my background within teacher education, when I teach, I use the activities that I'm doing in the way that I'm leading a session as a model for how other people can do things or how you can take things forward into classrooms. So let's take a moment to reflect on the different things that we did within this workshop that help us consider questioning. Were there some types of questions that I asked or specific questions that I asked that you really noticed? Was there a setup of the classroom that you noticed? And are there things that I didn't do or could have done that might also help us consider questioning in the future? I'll lay that one out there for you.
I'd like to question, first you had us kind of reflect on our own personal questions or response to your questions, but then I liked how you kind of expanded it to, can you imagine somebody else having a question, or can you imagine somebody who isn't physically here with us? Can you imagine what their question might be? And that was interesting to kind of think outside of my own perspective.
Mm-hmm. Okay, why would I do it in that way? Why would I have you answer from your own perspective first, and then ask the whole group to think beyond their own perspective? How does that help shape the class?
It could get us to ask questions that maybe other people are afraid of asking. Because often I'd imagine those being more general questions where you think, oh, I already know the answer, but maybe someone wouldn't. So it encourages maybe questions from those who are unconfident.
Yeah. And it also, some of those questions that come up could still be people's personal questions, but then they don't have to feel that it's tied to them individually, that they're outing themselves as not fully understanding something or coming from another perspective. They can put it out there with the group with at least some layer of anonymity or comfort. Okay, thank you. What's another thing that someone noticed about our session today?
You actually adapted to our answers. I mean, that's one thing that's an important thing. It was clear that you actually listened to what we were saying. You weren't just following a set plan.
Yeah. Okay. And to a degree, I did have a really set plan. We're gathering questions. We're going to group those questions. We're going to talk about those groups of questions. But I left some flexibility in there for, okay, each group that comes in is different, brings together different questions, different strengths, different perspectives. How do I leave room within the discussion that people can pull those in and shape where we're going as a group? That's something that I will be honest is really hard to do in your first time teaching a course or your first time teaching a specific lesson because you don't know many of the directions that it can go in. But after you've done something once or twice, you can start allowing more and more of that freedom because you can feel more comfortable with the different directions that it might take. What else happened today?
I think it's really engaging. So it's not that we are just like sitting down and listening to a lecture, but we are all working together and also kind of like situating the knowledge from like people in the class as well, and bringing that into the lesson plan is empowering. So yeah.
So I also thought exactly the same thing that I noticed about this. So it was mostly driven by the participants, So you drew it out of us, so the whole session unfolded, from the questions, from the group, and you also facilitated this, supplemented with your own questions and materials. So that was, interesting.
Yeah, it felt like we were working together to solve a problem.
And then once we were close to a solution, then you gave us a challenging question on top of that, which, prompted further thought, even though we had kind of come up with a solution to now think about how we're going to move forward with that information.
Awesome. Are there things that, does anybody, I kind of heard someone start. Is there anything else anyone wants to share before we move on?
Just want to. Okay, just one last thing to add on top of that. It's like we are not just coming in to take knowledge, but we're walking away with new questions. I think that's really cool.
So I think the feedback you provide is very supportive and also transfer knowledge. In addition to the answer you gave, you also provide more supporting materials or supporting thoughts and inspire us to think more about the concept instead of the topic we're just talking about.
Right, like you didn't say, okay, here are the handouts. It was you employed the handouts when they were relevant in our organic conversation.
So what are things that I didn't necessarily do, or what are ways that I could continue focusing on my own questioning within a setting like this?
As to focusing on the same format that we came up with, before, during, and after. Maybe that can also apply, to your own, facilitation.
Yeah.
Maybe if you could, for example, email, some of the materials in advance, we have some expectations how this session would be run, if you could give us some of the themes and questions, and so we could come more prepared probably and have some reflected about it a little bit, maybe,
Definitely.
That's the beforehand.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I wanted I kind of drew a grid up here on our 4 different things, because as you were all talking, one of the things that I was thinking is that this is a great checklist. I want to write this down so that as I'm thinking about my own sessions and as I'm planning for my class or planning for professional development sessions, have I thought about these things within all phases? If I have, I'm probably really ready to go. And if I see that something is missing, that lets me know what I might focus on a little bit more or reflect more for the next time. So I'm definitely taking that grid away from what we're doing today. All right? What's the biggest takeaway that you're leaving here with today? We'll each share one, and then we'll be done, and we'll go out. There are PowerPoint slides that do have some content that if we had needed to get there, I have them. If you would like me to email you those so that you kind of have that as backup, you're welcome to that. Leave me your email. I have email addresses, so if you just put a star next to it, I will make sure that those get sent to you. But what is your big takeaway? Anyone can start.
I think I definitely need to carefully design my questions, because before I just randomly ask questions. I never noticed if a question is good or not. So for now, I think it's better to prepare for the class.
Thank you, Lily.
I'm gonna say mine is this actually, so I'm gonna take a picture. And think about this every time.
And I would say mine is this. This is we've studied blooms all the time, but having it listed in actions and outcomes and having example questions is this is like gold.
Yeah, and especially never having studied blooms, that is incredible. I'm so excited to look that over.
Along the lines that she mentioned, really, so you made us really think more comprehensively about these discussions, and before coming here, probably didn't have as comprehensive, conceptions of this as we now have it, So you made us think about that. Think that it is more complex, that the more preparation you have, the more advanced thoughts you give to your discussions, the better it is, the more prepared you are, and the more efficient and productive discussions you will have. So that's